Is we are looking at the question that you had for your practice in class, and we are looking first of all at the question itself, then we're going to move on to the marking key and look at how you could have demonstrated a higher level answer. There are sugary treats for people who can give me impressive bits of information, and sarcasm for those who don't. So let's look at the question first of all. What conventions of persuasive text does Tim Minchin use in his speech to UWA students to convince them to adopt his ideas? What do we need, fellas? What's important in that question besides all of it? But what are we going to pick up on? Yes. It's weird because he put his hand up and you answered it, but you are correct. Conventions of persuasive text, particularly. So, what are some conventions of persuasive texts? Yes. Satire, definitely, yes. Humor is, yeah, that falls together, yeah. Rhetorical questions, absolutely. Sarcasm has been mentioned, but in this class it is definitely stressed. Metaphors. Yes, don't forget things like assonance, alliteration, use of statistics, use of allusions to historical and cultural events, quotations, tricolon, those kinds of things. So because it's been specified that you need to do conventions of persuasive texts, that's what we need to see. You can't just be talking about his presentation or some of his narrative conventions without linking it to his desire to persuade you to adopt an idea. If you don't, then you won't get your marks. What else is important there? Yes. Yes, well, you've got two parts there. The idea is that there is an idea he is trying to convince them of. There is an idea, there is something he wants them to believe. You can't just say over and over again, convince them of ideas, convince him of ideas. You have to actually tell me what the idea is. So, what is the idea? Say it outright. It has to be in a sentence. What's his idea? Come on, sugary treat. Someone's muttering. What are his ideas? I actually wrote it on the lesson plan for that day. Yes. Yeah, so one of the ideas he puts forward, one of the ways of living to fulfill his idea is to embrace the idea of being a teacher in life, be someone who shares ideas. What is another idea? Yes. You don't have to know what you're doing in life. He says that, you can find that on your way. What is another idea that he has? You can't be the same person or you're going to a diabetic coma. Um, all right, I'm going to help you out. Essentially, he's saying that you have to be empathetic in life and you have to be a critical thinker. You have to examine ideas, you have to examine yourself, and you have to be kind. Who is he telling this to? Yeah. Yeah, graduate class of UWA. These are young adults. More than that, they are young West Australian adults from a university that has a great reputation for churning out very high level students. These are potential elites. So when he's talking to this potential elite group, he's talking to them about how they shouldn't abuse their power and how they shouldn't abuse their privilege, essentially. If you were to bring that awareness of his audience into your work, you would already be demonstrating a higher level understanding of who the audience are. All right, so let's move on. Let's see where you would actually get the marks for this. Understand how language use can have inclusive and exclusive social effects and can empower or disempower people. So we're looking at that kind of affect social effects, power and disempower. So how can you do that with Tim Minchin? What is it that you could talk about with him? So I've given you 3 minutes now. I have my variety of sugary treats. And let's remind me of what it is that you're trying to demonstrate. Oh, please don't make me put a death threat onto video here. Thank you. Excellent. Looking this way. Um, So you have to demonstrate that you understand how language use can have an inclusive and exclusive social effect and can empower or disempower people. By the way, don't worry about question 1 or 2. That's going from a different thing. Let's get rid of all of that because you only had question 1. So how can you show that you have a sophisticated and complex understanding of that? Well, I gave you a little bit of a hint before, but what would you bring up there? Little chocolate, come on, think about it. No idea? What if I gave you a hint about his audience being significant here? Yes, Tristan.
They are likely to consider a career in teaching, and he says to be a teacher.
Well, I don't know if they're necessarily likely to be one, but certainly the idea of the emphasis on the good of the many, which is what the teaching metaphor is about. Shh. So when he's using that metaphor of be a teacher, remember, of course, that he's addressing a group of people who, within academia, are privileged. UWA has that reputation of being, the highest of the high. So he's asking them in some ways to accept a position which is more humble, but he's making that appear honorable. He's making that appear like it's a sign of their solid ethics. That's quite a sophisticated way of addressing a group of privileged people to share their privilege, to be empathetic, to critically examine their space in society. And of course, we are tying it to a convention, we tie it to figurative language metaphor. So we're showing we understand the complexity of that metaphor. All right, now that's only one that you could have looked at. You could have looked at the way he, approaches them as empathetic thinking people. He uses the word we, our. He is embracing them in his, inspirational perception of their own future and of their own potential to contribute within society. You could bring up how he actually does exclude a group. Do you remember the group that he excludes? The 30%. Yes. Certainly, he does look at those people. I think he uses an expletive at that point as well. If he doesn't, he's certainly looking at negatively at the way that people who don't practice his ideas, they are represented in a way that shows them as abusing their privilege. So remember, he says, I will judge you on the way you treat the least powerful. He doesn't say people less fortunate than you or less privileged. He says the least. He's saying he's representing them by the use of that word, that quantitative word, least, as a bully. It's a representation of people who don't embrace his thoughts. I would also bring up his representation of people who don't believe in climate change as an example of those who don't examine their own opinions. When he uses that example, he uses a statistic which, first of all, minimizes them to 30%, but then he creates a cause and effect. He suggests that that is a political and not a scientific decision. So again, he is representing people who would speak against his position negatively and making it less attractive to his audience to identify with them. So that's how you can get it to the complicated and sophisticated level. You have to recognize who his audience is. Why is he putting so much emphasis on their basic goodness as people? Why is he looking specifically at privilege? Why is he looking at the idea that, of them as having something worth sharing? He's actually trying to have a social impact here. He's trying to create a fairer, more thoughtful society. He does, however, appeal to their particular their particular context. I pointed it out before. He makes allusions to a number of philosophers. The Joe. He makes a pun about Kant. Kant. Sorry, I said it wrong. That as a philosopher, he makes allusions to different disciplines. Like he talks about the art degree and he makes a joke about, art degrees being important, and that's a play on the idea that art degrees usually are thought about being as completely useless. So he's appealing to his audience there. So it's quite a sophisticated approach where he includes a group of people whose privilege could be problematic for his position, and he makes it feel as though it is in their best interest and ties in with their life experiences and their basic ethics to be a more giving member of society. Can you see that's quite complex? Hands up. Can you see that? Yeah, you put your hand up first so you get the lolly. All right, there we go. Now, I am going to give you again another 3 minutes to have a look at the next one, which is analyze how higher order concepts are developed in complex texts through language features. Now, language features are very specific. We're looking. Just a quick reminder to you, could I have everyone's attention? The literary language features, these are inclusive of these things: similes, metaphors, personification, pathetic fallacy, onomatopoeia, alliteration, assonance, rule of three, connotations, hyperbole, and that's how you pronounce it if you do any other way, repetition, rhetorical questions, and emotive language. So there's a little reminder for you. Okay, so while we were walking around the room, I was talking to people about you need to do it as a higher order concept. So in this kind of essay, if you wish to get a good mark, you can't just simply say, he is persuading us to embrace ideas. You've got to get the idea that he's actually getting very gently for them to act against their own self-interest. He's saying to these privileged people, they're in a university that has extraordinarily high social standing and social currency. He is asking them to act for the good of society generally and suggesting that this is in their self-interest because it will make them better people. That is not a quantitative advantage. That is not a financial advantage. That is not a social status advantage. They get no social currency from taking his advice. It is the idea of being better as a human being. It's an ethical improvement. And that argument only works if you acknowledge who the UWA students are and what place UWA takes in Australian academia. Now, with that in mind, do we have some examples of some language features he used that helped him in that process? Let's see. We do have sugary treats. Just crackle up here for people to know that it's real. Come on, I know there was a simile. I know there was a metaphor. Have a go. There is somebody climbing on our roof, yes. What about the simile of your opinions are like assholes? They need. Everyone has one, but then he takes it further. So that's the humour. Everyone in the room is included. Everyone laughs because we've all heard that before. But what does he then do with it? Yes, Joel. Excellent. So he takes humour and he extends that simile into a larger metaphor. The idea that, you are privileged people, you have now got your opinions, but you should be examining them. You should be making sure that the decisions you're making reflect the empathetic person that you are. All right, we also had some others. Let's see. Well, I noticed allusions. He was alluding to philosophers. The idea of philosophy is examining the way that people work, both morally and socially. All right, you could have also looked at quite as many of the times where he uses rhetorical questions, where he uses satire. He uses quite a lot of similes. He draws quite a lot of allusions to situations and idioms that we use in life. And I would also say that he uses a nice little balance. Oh God, they're going to use a drill during this, aren't they? Yes, the person on the roof. You're all excited, hoping they fall through, aren't you? Be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shh. Okay, so let me redirect you back. A feature of this, boys, I know, it's very exciting. I'm pretty sure they're going to land on Tristan at this point if they fall through.
Nice.
Okay. Shh. So, notice that he uses a balance at all times. He's using a contrasting juxtaposition of obscenity and colloquial language and humor, and then he will balance that by making quite an intellectual illusion. It's a continual pairing that he makes throughout. It's a feature of his work. It's that winning you over and impressing you, winning you over, establishing credibility. He's continually pairing it with it. I would say he never goes further than 30 seconds without making some kind of humorous aside, usually somewhat self deprecating or gently teasing his audience, but never too harshly. All right, let's have a look at the next one. Identify and explain how structure devices, including satire, shape different interpretations and responses to the text. Luckily, I actually already told you one of the structural devices that he actually uses. In fact, I told you two just then that you could have used. What are they? Come on, he uses a general overall one, yes?
Juxtaposition.
Yeah, he does. He juxtaposes different types of discourse as a way of both humorously engaging his audience and also establishing credibility with them. Your hand up, yes?
Was it contrast?
He that's the same as what he said, but good go. All right. The other thing that I would look at is that he is absolutely using satire throughout it as a structural technique. He also uses a numerical device, the 9 lessons that he wants you to have. All right, good. And of course, to get at a higher level for that, you would need to look at how he is shaping the interpretation of his audience, because you need that different interpretations and responses to the text. You need to be looking at how he is appealing to multiple people within his group, his audience, the UWA privileged people. Okay, now this one's really, really easy, and yeah, it is where we actually manage quite easily to wipe out a whole lot of our A's and even some of our B's. Articulate, sustained, and well structured responses. Yeah. In your introduction, I should be able to see your text that you are responding to, your understanding of the more sophisticated aspects of this text, and your thesis, what it is that you are trying to explore, prove, show me. You are trying to show me that Tim Minchin is speaking to a privileged group of West Australians that have cultural credibility within academia and the society to convince them to adopt his ideas that they should be part, in fact, spearheading a more empathetic, thoughtful, intelligent society. See there, I didn't just repeat the question, I actually provided more detail because I want to be able to show that I am articulate, that I can sustain my engagement with the question, and that I can do a well structured response. Your paragraphs should have logical flow, moving from the stating of your premise, the providing of important contextual information for our discussion, your example from the text fully explained, including looking at how it is a structural decision by Tim Minchin and its impact. So yeah, teal, essentially. Now sometimes you might break from teal, but you should only ever do that deliberately. It shouldn't be something that happens because you don't understand structure. As you get older, you might start looking at extended metaphors as a structure for your essays, but please don't do that this year, it's far too early. But teal is something that you can use. You need to give yourself 5 minutes at the end to read over your work, to make sure that grammatically your sentences have a purpose and they flow between each other. Use connecting words like also, in addition, hence, as a consequence, so that I can see that there's a connection between your premise, your explanation of your context or your ideas, your evidence, and your conclusion. I must see within that paragraph that it's all part of one flow. And there is actually a video on that that I can link for you guys that I'll get on how to make those kind of connections within a paragraph. Your spelling has to be good. If your spelling is bad, it has to be consistent. If you use American spelling, you have to do it consistently. Please don't, but because you are actually meant to use Australian English, which I believe is the Macquarie. But when you're swapping between American and and English use of Zs and Ss and things like that, you have to choose a side. Otherwise, it looks like you just don't know that there's a difference between the two. If you don't know how to spell a word, you can always ask your teacher. If it's an in-class exam situation, they may say no, but who knows? You could trick them into saying yes, and then you look great. You will never be marked down for making neat annotations on your page. In fact, it will increase your mark because we will see that you are a reflective, self-editing person who took time. If you draw flowers and skulls over your paper and you have spelling errors, we know the opposite, that you're somebody who doesn't look over their work, doesn't care about it being correctly presented. Now, legibility does also count here, because if I can't read your writing, I can't see that it is logical and structured. Choose a pen that you write easily with. Go down to Officeworks, they've got that big display. Keep writing with pens until you find your pen. Everyone has their pen. That's just soft enough that it rolls beautifully, but it doesn't glug. Choose your pen, have that one. Bring whiteout tape, not whiteout liquid paper. Why? Why? Yes. Nobody ever comes back and writes the word in, and waiting, blowing on it is using up your valuable time. Shh. I should never ever see any of you sitting at the end of an assessment with your pen in your hand staring into space. That is valuable editing time, where you can neatly add extra information by little arrows, little numbers, little asterisks, put it on the end, add extra stuff. Go to the back page, try and work out the different ways that you could have actually spelt that word that you're not terribly sure about until you get the right one. That is worth 5 out of your 20 marks. If you choose not to have those marks, that's a very silly decision. All right. Are there any questions at this point? Okay. What I want you to do now is to look through your own work and give yourself a mark. Yes. What would you have got? If we'd had more time, I'd have got somebody else to do it, so you're getting off easily. And I will edit this and put it up later for all the good it will do you.
Probably a 7.
A 7 out of 20? Yeah, until you know the marking key, you can't get it right.